Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's Pyromancer here, and welcome back to my channel. Hope you're all having a wonderful day, morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are in the world. And today we're going to be taking another look at the N'Zoth raid finale from Ny'alotha. Now, before I get into this, I think it's pretty fair to say that there's a lot of disappointment from many people. There are obviously also some people that would defend the cinematic. At the end of the day, I'm not really here to discuss whether it was good or not. My feeling on it is that it was very underwhelming, and that's the main issue for me. I was kind of just hoping for more, and hopefully the mythic version of the fight brings more light to the situation, although I don't believe we're going to get a mythic cinematic. But I do think it's worth talking about a little bit more in depth. I did put up just a reaction video, and if you watch that, you kind of know how I feel about it already. But one of the things which I acknowledged at the end of that reaction video was that there are definitely some inspiration points in this cinematic that were clearly drawn from The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. And my thought process on this was, wow, did they really rip Lord of the Rings off? And whether it's being ripped off or whether it's being inspired by or whatever, I think is a different discussion. I think really my thought process led into this idea of there's no way Blizzard didn't know that people would notice that. I mean, generally you don't put stuff in a cinematic that you don't want people to notice, right? Like that's the entire idea of like the cinematography that goes into creating pre-rendered cutscenes like what we see. And the reason why I thought about this in that way was maybe it's not just Blizzard copying or ripping off or whatever what happened in Lord of the Rings, but maybe they're trying to kind of hint at something. Maybe they're trying to say something with that. Because I feel like in most cinematics, there's a purpose for everything that happens. I don't think that you introduce animations and frames and pieces of dialogue and things like that without a purpose. So I started to look into it a little more, and I'm not saying that this is like definitively what's happening. This is just something that I thought I would want to share with you, because you guys might find this interesting. So if you do, please hit the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel for more content like this in the future. Let's get into it. So first off, we have to go over how the raid cinematic is similar to what you see at the end of Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. So let's just watch the WoW cinematic really quick, and then we'll compare it to what happens in Lord of the Rings. Okay. 27 seconds. That's, yeah, okay. So then let's look at Lord of the Rings. So that's the main point anyway. So you can kind of see where some of those similarities are coming in, right? Like you can clearly see with like the tower collapsing and the eyes like burning out, and you have this like explosion. You know, you have the big dark bastion of N'Zoth, you know. You even have these little micro explosions that are happening with the Azerite in the background that you can see. If we like do a little frame by frame here. Pretty sure you can see some of that happening in the background. Like, look at this tower back here. You have, like, the explosion and shockwave, just like what you're getting on the tower that has the Eye of Sauron on it. So, I mean, there's pretty clearly some inspiration going on there. You also have N'Zoth's tentacles like cracking into different segments in the back. It's very interesting. Then they kind of dissipate into nothing. And the light kind of cracking through. Now, before we go further, some people would ask, are we like light forging Ny'alotha? Is Ny'alotha actually being destroyed? Well, as I pointed out in my reaction video, it does appear that it's being burned away in some capacity. I mean, when you look at the top left, this definitely looks like fire, which would kind of make sense because, well, pretty much every Azerite ability that does damage does it as fire damage. But it is possible, I mean, considering we're literally blasting him with a beam of re-origination, that something different is happening. And we can talk a little bit more about re-origination later, but the idea is, according to at least some of the dungeon journals from the Halls of Origination, that it was up to some of the constructs within the Halls of Origination to ensure that life actually continued to exist after the effects of re-origination. And I think that was, I mean, apparently supposed to kind of be the premise, which then kind of begs the question as well, what does it actually do to N'Zoth? Not only that, re-origination in some aspects has been said to revert Titan created beings. For instance, used to have the Earth and used to have the Vrykul. The Titan Forged, essentially. It could revert them back into their Titan-made state as the Titans had willed them initially, but for everything else it would be destroyed. So, I just want to throw out there, I do have a theory, and have had one for a long time, that in some capacity, these things, these old gods are actually Titan-made, and they don't come from Void Lords, as we're led to believe. And so it would be very curious to find out that in some capacity, N'Zoth was maybe returned to what he was before. I think it's possible that aeons, untold amounts of time, have warped N'Zoth and the other old gods into something that they were not originally. But that's really not like the main point of this discussion. I wanted to read more about Lord of the Rings, because admittedly, I don't really know that much about Lord of the Rings. I know that there's like a creator god who's basically like the whole god of the universe, who created all the other like gods. And so I decided maybe we could look at that. And what I found was kind of interesting, because I initially was reading about Sauron, and that was like the main thing. But we're going to get to Sauron in a minute. So in the Tolkien universe, you have one supreme deity referred to as Eru Iluvatar. And it says here on the fandom page for Lord of the Rings, Eru was the supreme deity of Arda. And Arda is basically the world, like Earth, essentially, in Lord of the Rings. He was the single creator above the Valar, but delegated almost all direct action within Ea to the Ainur, including the shaping of the world. Now, what does that even mean? So the Valar are basically like the shaper, ordering kind of gods that were descendant of Eru. But they are Ainur. So Ainur are split into two different classifications, and that is the Valar and the Maiar. And the Valar are basically like the high, powerful, they're basically like the Titans, essentially, is what they are. So let's read a little bit more about Eru here. Eru was transcendent, completely outside of and beyond the world. So Eru is a male. He first created a group of angelic beings called in Elvish the Ainur, and these holy spirits were co-actors in the creation of Arda, the world or earth, through a holy music and chanting called the Music of Ainur. He is known also as the All-Powerful, and he alone could create independent life, or reality, using the flame imperishable. The next thing he fashioned was, I think it's Ea, the world and all that is, and Ea was in the void, or the outside, as it was sometimes called. He then gave the Ainur, which again are basically the overall classification for the Valar and the Maiar, to go into Ea, which is the universe, and fashion it as they wanted to. The greatest Ainur who chose to do so were called the Valar, and they controlled the shaping of Arda. They could not make life, however, as Aule proves, who was able to give only shape to the dwarves, while consciousness was given to them by Eru. The Valar were accompanied by the Maiar, the lesser Ainur. So basically what this is saying is Eru gave birth to the Ainur, and under the umbrella of the Ainur, you had the Valar, which are gods essentially, and then you had Maiar, which are lesser Ainur, which later you find out are wizards. Gandalf is a Maiar. So is Sauron, actually. So let's read a second about the Valar. So the Valar, it says here, were the powers of Arda who shaped and ruled the world. They lived on the western continent of Aman. I just want to throw out there, the leader of the pantheon in WoW's name is Aman'Thul. I do think that it has a meaning, but I don't think it's all bound to what we learn in Tolkien here. It has other, I mean, Aman was the name of the big bad guy in StarCraft as well. So anyway, moving on. The Valar were the 14 Ainur who, after being molded of Eru's thought, entered Arda after its creation, to give order to the world and to combat the new evils of Melkor, who we will talk about in a little bit. They had helped to begin the shaping of Arda through the music of Iluvatar, and often referred to one another as brother or sister. Is this starting to sound familiar to you guys? It's very much like the Titans in WoW. Each of the Ainur had added his or her own part to the music creating the world incarnate, save for Melkor, who at the time was counted as the strongest of them. Remember that. His vision of what Arda should have been differed from Eru's, which led to his banishment and great rebellion that would cause most of the ills of the world of Arda. So, let's talk about this a little bit. So Eru Iluvatar gives birth to the Valar, and Melkor is one of them. Now, you're already hearing they're often referring to each other as brother and sister, and Melkor seems to be the bad egg. I want to throw out there that in the Tolkien universe, Melkor is pretty much just a bad guy. He's genuinely just not in line with the others and is set out to do some pretty awful and terrible things. So, the thing about this is, let's read about Melkor, who's essentially a child of Eru Iluvatar. Also, while we're on this topic, I think that WoW's version of Eru Iluvatar, although he does look like Aman'Thul, I think is actually, and I'll explain why in a little bit, WoW's Eru would be Azeroth. I think Azeroth is creation and is the god of all gods, which is why Azeroth is more powerful than the other Titans, which we know allegedly is a fact, and the Titans apparently know this as well. It's because Azeroth created all the others. Now, I know what people believe about the age of Azeroth, but I'm not going to get into that discussion right now. I'm just telling you what I believe currently. So yeah, I think Azeroth is creation, and I think that in tandem that is essentially light. Funny enough is if you read Chronicle Volume 1, the origins of the universe start with light, and it's actually in the form of a grand prismatic sea, and within that sea there is a song which is being sung, the song of creation, and it sings of joy and hope is a very important thing as well, by the way. So I think it's a little interesting that basically Eru created all of this other shit via music. That's very interesting in my opinion. So let's read about Melkor. Melkor, he who arises in might, later known predominantly as Morgoth, in other words, black foe of the world, was the first Dark Lord in the primordial source of evil in Ea. Originally the most powerful of the Ainur created by Eru Iluvatar, Melkor rebelled against his creator out of pride and sought to corrupt Arda. Again, pride coming into play is something I've pointed out many times in the past as a very corrupting force and something that takes a grand amount of willpower to ever overcome, if you ever even have the ability to. After committing many evils in the First Age, such as the theft of the Silmarils, which resulted in his name Morgoth, and the destruction of the 2 lamps and the 2 trees of Valinor, Morgoth was defeated by the host of Valinor in the War of Wrath and cast out of Arda into the Void, where he now waits. Melkor was created by Eru Iluvatar in the Timeless Halls at the beginning of creation. His brother was Manwë, although Melkor was greater in power and knowledge than any of the Ainur. Impatient with the emptiness of the great void outside the timeless halls and desiring to create things of his own, Melkor often went forth into the void in search of the flame imperishable. but the flame was of Iluvatar and resided with him, and Melkor never discovered it. He continued to search, however, and as such was often alone and apart from his fellow Ainur. It was during these lonesome periods that Melkor began to have ideas and thoughts of his own that were not in accordance with his fellow Ainur. So, the thing about that is that sounds a whole hell of a lot like Sargeras in World of Warcraft. He has a brother, and in WoW, Sargeras' brother presumably would be Aman'Thul. In fact, if we go back to the Shadows and Light RPG lore, it actually states that Aman'Thul is the brother of Sargeras, and that Eonar is the wife of Aman'Thul, or consort, if you will. Let's read about Manwë, the brother of Melkor. First off, look at him. A nice big old blue robe, white flowing hair, gray flowing hair, big gray beard. I think he looks reasonably similar to Aman'Thul in World of Warcraft. But again, this is fan art. Manwë, Blessed One, was the leader of the Ainur, so he was the leader of the gods who descended from Eru Iluvatar. One of the Eretar, king of the Valar, again, the Valar were the 14 gods, the greater gods essentially, who set out to shape and rule Arda. Husband of Varda, who we will read more about, brother of the Dark Lord Melkor and king of Arda. He was the eldest of the Ainur, and according to Chronicle, Aman'Thul was the first of the Titans to awaken, and the one that best understood the will of Eru. When Melkor created the discord in the music of the Ainur, essentially a disruption, the second theme of Eru that rose to counter the discord used Manwë as its chief instrument. When Arda was formed, Manwë was appointed ruler of Arda, hence his most common title, the Elder King. Moving on a little bit further, as Manwë was completely free of evil, he was unable to comprehend it, leading him to believe Melkor's lies concerning his reformation. He released Melkor from Mandos, whereupon Melkor began plotting the downfall of the elves and the ruin of Amon's bliss. So, about this whole thing, you have basically a god who, through Melkor, is about shaping things how he believes they should be, and is kind of about creating discord, and is, the black one, the dark guy. It's just, I think it's kind of hilarious because that's exactly what Sargeras is in WoW. He's even referred to as like the Dark Titan to like set him apart from the others, right? In a very similar fashion that Melkor is, the black foe of the world. Now, again, Manwë is married to Varda. Okay, Varda was an Ainur and one of the Eretar and a Vala responsible for the outlining of the stars in the heavens above Arda. She was also known as Elbereth, Queen of the Stars, and was the spouse of Manwë, with whom she lived in Ilmarin on the summit of Teniquetil in Aman. Varda was the most beautiful of all the Valar, and her beauty was said to be beyond the description of men and elves, for her face radiates the light of Eru Iluvatar. Unsurprisingly, the province over which she ruled was light, to the extent where it was said that in light is her power and her joy. Even before Melkor began to create his discord, Varda knew his mind well and rejected him because of it, and was always his enemy from that moment on. As a result of this, Melkor also hated Varda in the most out of the Valar, and feared her more than all the others whom Eru had created. So what this is saying is that Varda, wife of Manwë, brother, who is the brother of Melkor, always had, not always, but for a very long time, had beef with Melkor. And actually, it says even before he began to create his discord, she knew his mind well and rejected him. It's funny because, again, in that Shadows and Light RPG lore for the tabletop RPG version of World of Warcraft, of WoW, they had always been butting heads. It was technically Sargeras and Aman'Thul, and Eonar's presence absolutely exacerbated this. She led to the beef, if you will, that existed between Sargeras and Aman'Thul. It's funny as well that it's basically saying her face radiates light, and in light is her power and her joy, because we've heard things in WoW before, like light is life and life is light, as quoted by, what's that Draenei, who's a total sellout? Velen, that's right. I think that's very interesting. And he also, Melkor, that is, feared Varda. And I do think that Sargeras fears Eonar as well. And I think that's because Eonar is very, very powerful and has some underlying, long, planned out schemes that are going on, which if you're familiar with my previous videos, you've probably heard about. But let's get to the point, because we're way off track of what I'm trying to say in regards to the inspiration for the cinematic. So secondary to the Valar were the Maiar. And the Maiar are essentially described as near primordial spirits that descended into Arda to help the Valar first shape the world. They were supposed to be numerous, yet not many were named. Their chiefs were Eanwe, Bannerbearer, and Herald of Manwe, and Ilmere, the handmaiden of Varda. 5 of these spirits in the Third Age were the incarnated wizards. Another interesting thing, because allegedly in the past there were 5 old gods, but we're going to get into that a little bit more. One of them, as you see here, is Sauron. Let's read about Sauron real quick. Sauron, the Abhorred, the Lord of the Rings, was a fallen Maya, creator of the One Ring, and this is a very important thing, the most trusted lieutenant of Melkor, or Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. After Melkor's defeat by the Valar, Sauron in time became the second Dark Lord and strove to conquer Arda by creating the Rings of Power. He was originally a Maya and essentially was created good and incorrupt, but ended up allying himself with the Dark Lord Morgoth for power to help him achieve his own goals, go figure. After Morgoth was defeated and locked outside the confines of the world, again, sounds, in my opinion, a little familiar, Sauron started to basically make moves to get people to worship Morgoth. However, while Morgoth, who is the same person as Melkor, wanted to either control or destroy Arda itself, again, in line with Sargeras, Mehrunes, again, who is Sauron, his desire was to dominate the minds and wills of its creatures. So in the cinematic, where we have this defeat of N'Zoth being contrasted with the defeat of Sauron, and to read that Sauron was one of the most trusted, or not one of, the most trusted lieutenant of Melkor, who is basically like Sargeras, I think that's pretty interesting. If you guys haven't seen my video about how Deathwing is a link between Sargeras and Argus and N'Zoth, you guys should definitely check that out. The fact that N'Zoth's head is on fucking fire and he seemingly has magma pouring out of his head, I think is quite indicative of some kind of interesting attributes of N'Zoth when compared to the other old gods. We've not seen anything like that in the past. I want to talk about a couple more things here, though, because as we know, Ea is the word that would become the whole of the universe, right? And it's literally meant to define what it means to be or exist. So, Ea is the universe, Arda is the world, which I would kind of connect that with Azeroth in this case. But there's a thing that also happens in the Tolkien universe. As I read a little bit further down, you find out about something that is called Dagor Daggerath. The Dagor Daggerath, or final battle, is the end times event described and alluded to in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. The Silmarillion, as Tolkien originally wrote it, ends with a prophecy by Mandos about the Dagor Daggerath, often referred to as the end. The remaining clue to this prophecy is found at the end of Akallabeth, where As-Pharazôn and his mortal warriors who had set foot in Aman were buried by falling hills, imprisoned in the caves of the Forgotten until the last battle and day of doom. The account is clearly inspired by and bears many similarities to the Norse legend of Ragnarok. And in WoW, this event is referred to as the end of all things and also hour of twilight. And Ragnarok from Norse mythology means the twilight of gods. And is sometimes also referred to as the end of all things as well. So here's the thing, is that Melkor was eventually defeated, just like Sargeras. In later writings, it becomes apparent that Melkor was not merely bound, but unhoused after his final capture, being beheaded and thus killed. That is, the body to which he had become so bound towards was destroyed, after which execution his spirit, still bound with the enchanted chain Angonor, was cast out through the door of night. His will is spoken of as an active force in the world, tempting and urging in thought, and sometimes in phantom manifestation. It says here, according to the prophecy, Morgoth will discover how to break the door of night and will blacken the sun and the moon. For the love of these, Arundel will return from the sky and shall meet Tulkas Manwe, Anwe, with the old version of his name, Fionwe, etc., etc. And there the forces shall fight against Melkor and the dark powers. So there's a series of events that'll happen. Finally, death and destruction will be dealt to Melkor. Turin will run his black sword, Gurthang, through Melkor's heart, thus avenging. Following this, there will be a second music of the Ainur. This song will sing into being a new world. Men and elves will sing it with the Ainur. It is unknown what the fate of the old races or of the old world will be in the new one. However, it is worth noting that the dwarves believe that after the greatest battle of all time, they will help rebuild Arda. So this is saying that there is basically an apocalypse event that includes the capture, after the capture and beheading of Melkor. Think about this. The Titans just captured WoW's version of Melkor, and he's not just bound in the Tolkien universe, he is actually unhoused, completely beheaded and killed. And that is not necessarily a good thing. I want to remind everybody that there was an interview with Alex Afrasiabi, who's one of the lead narrative guys with the World of Warcraft team, and he says that the red star in the sky is something that we should keep our eye on, and that it's very important, and that if it ever disappears, that's a bad thing. That is not a good thing. Well, many ask, what is the red star? Well, this is a screenshot that I took from the cinematic where Sargeras gets imprisoned, and I believe the red star to be inherently part of Sargeras' being. And I don't think that it would be a good thing if Sargeras' essence, I believe this is probably his soul, were to disappear from the sky. I think that would be a very, very bad thing. The reason is because I believe there's an underlying theme in World of Warcraft where Sargeras is actually the good guy. Almost said it. He's actually the good guy, and the Titans, or other Valar in this case, specifically the wife of Manwë, whose name is currently escaping me, Varda, is actually the big bad guy, essentially Eonar in World of Warcraft. So I think the reason why someone like Alex saying that star disappearing would be very bad, I think is that's a huge hint. Don't you think? It's like when you look at this image and you wonder what the red star is, and you have this being shown to you, for someone to say that disappearing is bad, what the fuck does that say about Sargeras? The point is, with all of this, Sauron could be represented in World of Warcraft by N'Zoth, and N'Zoth could in fact be a trusted lieutenant of Melkor in WoW, who would be Sargeras. And the fact that we're kind of steadily closing in on the end, and the apocalypse is clearly right around the corner for us, I think supports that idea. Now I understand what the narrative that you're supposed to believe says about Sargeras fearing the old gods because they were created by the Void Lords and they were going to corrupt the Titan, give rise to an unspeakably dark creature that would bring about the end of everything, which a lot of people don't realize the significance of the last part there. But the point is that I know what it says. I know what you're supposed to believe, but I also know what I've witnessed and what I've deduced through investigation and comparing and contrasting and looking at external sources like this. I could totally be wrong. I think that's always something that has to be considered. But I do really like the idea that maybe there is some more inspiration from Tolkien that's kind of being hinted at here. Something that's not necessarily being thrown right in your face, but is subtly being hinted at and should be used to come to other conclusions. So that's kind of my thought about this. What actually is going to happen to N'Zoth? And based upon all of N'Zoth's dialogue preceding the events of the end of Ny'alotha, it would seem that we did exactly what N'Zoth wanted us to do. And that may actually even include blasting him with reorigination. I'd love to see in the mythic fight N'Zoth be reverted to what he could have potentially have been beforehand, or maybe using the power of Azerite to show us a truth which we have yet to recognize, that would maybe set us up for Shadowlands and give us a better understanding of why it is significant to go there. Because ultimately, if we really just blast N'Zoth and the old gods are just gone, I would find that rather disappointing. I'm not really sure, if that's really the end that's deserved. And I think that most of you would probably agree with the sentiment that it's not, and that the old gods deserve more than what they were given. So, coming from someone who's admittedly kind of a noob with Tolkien lore and just decided to look at some stuff on the wiki, this is just my thoughts on that. And if you guys happen to know more about this and can elaborate better, or maybe explain this in a way that would either clear things up or further the idea that's being presented here, I'd really appreciate it if you put that down in the comments. Again, if you guys enjoyed this video and kind of what I'm going for here, I'd really appreciate a like on the video and a subscription to the channel. It is free to subscribe, and it makes sure that you are always up to date on my most current content. I don't really flood my content feed with videos like other content creators, so you're always welcome to jump back in and have a video a week or every 2 weeks and get a healthy dose of Pyromancer and not be overloaded. Thank you again to my patrons who make this possible. You can find a link to my Patreon over in the description down below. And I'll put up the names of all my patrons on the screen here. So thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And lastly, if you guys don't know, I do have a Twitter, twitter.com/pyromancersarg. I'd love it if you guys would go and follow me over there. And then also twitch.tv/pyromancer, where I am a partner Twitch streamer and nearing 20,000 followers there. I'd love it if you guys would become part of that community, so you can take part in some of the live speculation reactions like what I had when I watched the N'Zoth defeat cinematic. Thank you guys again for watching this video. I hope it wasn't too much incoherent rambling. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace!